So thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on winning in CBD. I'm just going to start off with some housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and we will share it along with the slides in the next few days with you. And in terms of today's agenda, we're going to start off looking at consumer habits with some fresh data and the current regulatory landscape within the EU and UK. We'll then be hosting a Q&A panel session with our special guest TTS Pharma. And I know some of you have already submitted questions for this, but hopefully at the bottom of your screen or maybe the top, you can see a Q&A section. So please feel free to pop any questions you have and we'll try to answer them today during the live sessions. Following on from the panel session, we're going to move on to looking at some NPD inspiration, opportunities, and ways in which you can really leverage the sensory experience of your products. And at the end, we'll answer any leftover questions. Now, CBD products have been kicking around for quite a while, with startups really leading the way. Now, looking at our attendees list, many of you are already working in innovation, but with the lack of clarity around compliant CBD usage within food and drink, it just hasn't been possible for many of you to innovate using CBD yet. We are, however, seeing real progression with EFSA and the FSA and feel that now is the time to start developing so you don't get left behind. We're going to start seeing legally compliant products launch from April 2021, and we want to help you be one of those launches. So before we jump in, I'll just start off with some quick introductions. Hopefully most of you know that we're a food innovation consultancy set up as a joint venture by Global Sensory and Consumer Research Agency, MMR, and product development experts, Food Innovation Solutions. From our side, we have myself, we have Susanna, who's one of our MDs, and Mia, who's one of our product developers. Now, we help our clients throughout the innovation process, but due to the challenging nature of using CBD, we've partnered up with technical regulatory experts and supplier TTS Pharma. So we're going to be running our panel session later with Mark, David, and Bo, so I'll let them introduce themselves then. But for now, let's start off with understanding why CBD is so relevant to consumers. Now, in the last year or so, we've been asked a lot if we think CBD is a bit of a fad or if it's got potential for real long-term trends. But if we take a step back from CBD just to look at macro trends, this may actually help us decide. Now, the 2019 Gallup Emotion Survey represented views of citizens from more than 140 countries. And it reported, sadly, that humanity is more anxious and more angry. The more we know, the more worried we are. Now, if we switch on the news, we are bombarded with negativity. Now, we can't do a webinar in 2020 without mentioning coronavirus. But all that the virus has done is just exacerbated the issues that were already there. We're in a mental health crisis. Anxiety and depression are serious problems, and it just doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. Now, there are lots of different ways to support your mental health, but we wanted to understand if UK consumers were ready for dietary solutions. So we actually asked 2,000 people in the UK if they'd ever considered buying products with certain benefits. Now, we've got a full range of benefits here, and unsurprisingly, immune health is up there, but so is sleep, something which is pretty correlated with your mental well-being. You know, we believe there is a definite interest in a more natural approach to supporting things such as mental focus and anxiety. Now, there are a wide range of ingredients which can be used to support your mental health, but I think CBD is probably one of the most exciting. We asked over 2,000 people in the UK if they've ever heard of CBD, and 60% said they had. And we also asked if they'd be willing to try it, and over a third are really keen to give it a go. There's a high curiosity factor when it comes to CBD because it pushes boundaries, it seems new and exciting, and maybe even a bit naughty. You know, consumers are being exposed to CBD, you know, through social media, influencers. There's loads of stories in the news about the health benefits. There are lots of products on shelves at the moment. So we asked 1,500 people in the UK what they thought CBD does. Now, it's quite a mixed bag with not much consensus, and there's even the misconception that the CBD can make you high. It's really quite tricky positioning CBD with consumers without making any real claims about what it can do right now. But this really highlights the need to establish the category to ensure mainstream success in the future. Now, there's also a fair amount of confusion as to where CBD even comes from. You know, before I started looking into CBD, I didn't really understand the different types of cannabis plants there are. So CBD is one of over 100 cannabinoids found in cannabis sativa, which is known as hemp. But it is also found in cannabis indica, which is what we know as marijuana. Now, from a consumer perspective, there's, of course, the association with THC and it being psychoactive. And this really hasn't been helped with many new product launches we're seeing, deliberately positioning itself with, you know, marijuana terminology, you know, such as 420, really upping that kind of illicit, maybe, you know, a bit naughty kind of positioning. And it can kind of feel gimmicky. But later on, we really explored the different ways in which you can leverage CBD to meet different consumer needs. You don't have to jump on the bandwagon. We feel there is plenty of opportunity for both big players and startups to develop products with real conviction. Now, before we look at these different opportunities, we're just going to touch on the regulatory landscape, as this has been a key challenge. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that startups are really taking the lead. You know, if you pop into Holland & Barrett or Planet Organic, there are plenty of new and interesting CBD options available. However, none of these are legally compliant. Now, there's been a lot of talk, mostly by the startups, around self-regulation and the fact that they're doing all the hard work when it comes to safety and stability, but this will not be able to continue for much longer. Now, I'm sure many of you know about the Novel Foods Act, but I just want to give a brief overview to everyone. Now, the Novel Foods Act came into force to ensure that all ingredients used in the EU and UK food and drink were safe, not misleading for the consumer, and not replacing foods in a way that could put consumers at a nutritional disadvantage. Now, novel foods are foods which have not been widely consumed by people in the UK or EU before May 1997. And there's no history of consumption of CBD on a large scale. Therefore, it really needs to be approved before it can be used in food and drink. Now, this hasn't exactly been a quick process for CBD, but we are seeing really good progress. And there are some really, really important deadlines coming up, which I feel you must know. And if you leave the webinar with anything, it's these deadlines. If you already have a product in market, it needs to be aligned with a validated novel food application, or it cannot remain on the market post 31st of March 2021. And the same goes if you want to launch a new product into market. It also needs to be aligned with a validated novel food application. And there won't be any extensions to these deadlines. Now, something to note is that validation isn't the same as approval. It just means you can remain in market whilst your application is being reviewed. And if your application is rejected, your products will be taken off the shelf immediately, which is something that we really don't want to see happen to your products. There's also something very important to take into consideration. And actually, this piece of information is why we felt we had to do the webinar right now for our clients. And it's that any product which is not aligned with an existing application and commencing stability data prior to 31st of March will not be able to take advantage of accelerated stability testing. Instead, you would have to prove stability over 2+ years before you're even allowed to launch. Now, we hope you appreciate the sense of urgency around this. It's very much act now or wait possibly until 2023 to launch. Now, as I've explored the world of CBD, what I found most frustrating and difficult is just the sheer amount of confusion and misinformation being spread. And there are a fair amount of cowboys promising workarounds and loopholes. I just want to make really clear that there are no loopholes. It's really important you're working with a supplier that's legally compliant and just doesn't want to deviate away from that. You know, following the rules is going to be really important. You really don't want to have your products taken off the shelf. you know, from ensuring that you're not sourcing CBD from the flowers and the top of the hemp plant to ensuring it's grown in the EU for a simplified regulatory pathway. These things will matter. We're also hearing a lot of startups talk about full spectrum or broad spectrum, but that's unlikely to be approved by EFSA and FSA. EFSA's in the process of reviewing dossiers, and we're expecting monospectrum distillate and isolate dry powder, both synthetic and naturally derived, to be approved. Therefore, it's absolutely vital that you're working with suppliers that can provide you with the right ingredients, which are going to be legally compliant and can answer all your questions around supply chain. And this really brings us as to why we felt we wanted to partner up with TTS Pharma today to really help answer some of your questions. They're well ahead in terms of novel food application, and with their pharmaceutical logic and extensive independent analysis, we feel most confident that they'll be able to supply us and our clients with the legally compliant ingredients as quickly as possible, and also support us when we are working with clients across the innovation process. So now we're actually going to move on to our panel session. So enough of me talking with TTS Pharma. So I'd firstly like to start off with some introductions. So hopefully everyone can actually see all of us. Fingers crossed. Yeah, brilliant. Mark, do you want to start off?
Yeah, hello. Thanks, Amira, very much for your brief introduction, and everyone who's watching. I'm Mark Tucker. I'm TTS's chief executive. The company's formed in 2012. We are fundamentally a drug delivery company who has pivoted into cannabinoids, having been requested to do so by a number of clients who wanted to use our mechanism for CBD and other primary cannabinoids. So as a company, we've spent the last 2 years establishing and navigating the regulatory pathway. We have a number of R&D projects running at Aberystwyth University under Home Office approvals and licenses, and we are got a number of clinical studies running across a number of different species, and all of that data that we're generating is part and parcel of the scientific evidence that's needed to establish a brand or a product in this fairly novel and innovative area, novel foods, because it's quite young compared to pharmaceuticals. So there's a lot of unknown still, but you have to go into the review process with data and with knowledge and with analytics. And we feel that we've spent our time well over the last 2 years. So without explaining too much further, I've got two colleagues with me, Bo Tandrup, who's joined us from Copenhagen, and David Lovell, who's a consultant to us and has been looking after our regulatory pathway in terms of food supplements and what we can and can't say and what we can and can't do. Bo, perhaps you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I'm Bo. I have a scientific background in pharmaceutical sciences. I'm responsible for business development, and I'm also a qualified person in TTS Pharma. And I come with some experience in plant-derived active substances from the pharmaceutical industry, such as nicotine. And I've also worked a lot with regulatory affairs. And as Mark said, I'm based in Copenhagen. Thanks.
David.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Amira. So I'm David Lovell. My background's in regulation. So my first sort of career was in trading standards. More recently, I headed up a national regulator with regards to environmental sustainability legislation, and ultimately in the last sort of 12 months I've set up my own consultancy business. Mark's one of my key clients. I have assisted the business in the last sort of eight months, really just exploring the regulatory landscape. It's quite complicated, and ultimately guiding them in the right direction.
Brilliant. So we've got lots of experts today with us. So thank you so much for joining. The first one we've got is that the novel food applications process can be really expensive. So does everyone have to submit one, or can our client buy the ingredient off of someone that's already been approved?
Yeah, I'll take that one if I may to start with. It can be expensive. The actual total cost of the novel food process has not yet been ascertained fully because no one's completed it. So in response to having a dossier that's under review, they could ask you to go back and get additional data. It is well into the 6 figures at the moment. I can't quote a number exactly because we're not done, but it is rising. Not everyone has to do a novel food application. At the moment, it is focused on the suppliers and manufacturers of the bulk ingredients. So if you are a manufacturer of a garlic extract, it would be your obligation to get the novel food approval for that garlic extract. In the same way, we're having to do it for CBD. We would have to do it for CBG or CBC or another cannabinoid if we wanted to use those as ingredients. So at the moment, it's all down to the supply chain having the approval, and then brands and finished products can attach themselves to a particular supply chain. Providing there's no change in the manufactured product between the point of sale from the manufacturer and the supplier to the individual brand and finished product. So all elements of the supply chain are reviewed as part of the novel food dossier, but in essence, a finished product or a brand would not have to have their own novel food dossier application. But they do need to be aligned.
That's good to know, actually. So I guess as long as they're working with somebody that, like yourselves, that is doing that process, that is a way in which they could get to market.
Right.
Brilliant. Okay. So the next question is around the FSA announcement that from the 1st of April 2021, any products with CBD will just be removed from shelf. How likely is that to actually happen? Will it actually be enforced?
David, would you like to say that?
Okay, that sounds like that's right up my street. So as you said, Amira, this has been a long journey. It's fair to say that the FSA have been criticised by a number of stakeholders with regards to the length of the journey. So I think to that end, they will be extremely keen to ensure that deadline is enforced. It's probably just worth sort of taking a stage back just to understand that the FSA are the policymakers. So from a delivery point of view, the frontline delivery for this is going to be the local trading standards departments. So at this moment in time, they're probably not particularly well resourced. So there will have to be some thought process around the guidance that's going to be issued to those local trading standards. And likewise, it's going to have to be properly resourced. But I'm fully envisaging on the 1st of April next year, there will be activity with regards to non-compliant product.
Okay, so risky to just hope it's going to go away. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question here around what does CBD actually taste like, and does it actually impact the product experience at all?
I can answer that. CBD has a slightly chlorophyllic taste. I don't know any better word. It's a little bit plant-like, but it's not very intensive, particularly not in small doses. And so generally, having worked a lot with taste masking, I would say that it's an easy taste to work with. It can easily be masked and balanced with sour and sweet and bitter flavor. So there are a lot of ways you can improve the flavor. It's not very difficult.
For us as an innovation consultancy, good to know that there aren't any major challenges around actually using it. I've got a question around the terminology. So we've seen, I guess, the products on shelves at the moment aren't necessarily compliant, but it's quite interesting to see the language they're using. So there's mention of like hemp seed oil, CBD, cannabis sativa. I'm really interested to hear, is there a certain name you have to use?
Let me start, if I may, and maybe David can finish. There are a number of different descriptions of the various different types of plants. There are certain regulations that you have to follow, for example, within cosmetics, and there's a certain nomenclature you have to follow in a certain order, depending on the volume of the ingredient. And it's very similar in foods as well. So there are minimum requirements one has to follow, but there are, again, in the more complex products that are currently on the market, those products are not necessarily trying to be as transparent as the consumer might like, because they're trying to cover up what's actually in it. So when you see things that say 0 THC, it probably isn't. They just haven't tested it to the level of suitable analytics that they should have done. But it enables the marketing team to go, free and wild. So there are certain, for example, the use of hemp seed oil, which is cold pressed, is not covered by some of the regulations, or is defined as excluded from the Misuse of Drugs Act, for example. So people often use hemp seed oil as a carrier oil, and that's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it. There's trace elements of the naughty stuff in it. You've just got to know, you can't describe it as a CBD oil if it's a hemp seed oil. So CBD is a specific cannabinoid that is found within hemp and within different types of cannabis plants. And one has to be very careful how you describe it, how you display it, and be very careful you don't make any claims unless you've got the evidence to do so. David, would you like to add to that?
And there's not much more to add than that, really. I think just in a very sort of broad, principle-based, you need to ensure that you're labelling your products correctly, they're truthful, they're not misleading at all, which was on the slide before. If you're doing any of those things, then ultimately you might face enforcement action by again your local trading standards, or the ASA may have a view on your activities.
I think it's I guess really important around the trust in food as well, that I guess with so many products out there at the moment saying different things, I think it can be very confusing to consumers. So I think obviously a big piece will be around education within the whole category. So yeah, hopefully kind of from April next year it'll be a bit clearer. I've got a question around how much CBD do you actually have to use, I guess, to declare it, but I guess for the efficacy cues, or people to realize that it's there? Is there a minimum dosage?
That's one for the pharmacists, so I can take that. There's no minimum dose. There's a maximum dose. In the UK, the Food Standard Agency's guideline says 70 milligrams per day. And that information comes off the Committee of Toxicity, and I believe it's based on 1 milligram per kilo, like you usually use in the pharmaceutical industry. So in the UK, the maximum dose is 70 milligrams per day. But in some other countries, I know in South Africa, for example, it's as low as 20 milligrams per day. So you have to pay attention to which market you want to launch your products.
Mm-hmm. I think it's I guess quite difficult with the whole pharmaceutical versus food world. It's kind of, I guess, a different way of looking at things and ensuring that it's still safe and that consumers know what they're taking. And kind of leads us on to the next question. Are there any people that shouldn't use CBD? And would you have to put a warning on pack, or is there anything specific you'd have to say?
Sounds like another one of mine. So with regards to the recent announcement by the FSA back in February, they gave additional guidance, and note the word guidance. It isn't a legal requirement as it stands, but they quoted a number of requirements from the Committee of Toxicity. So one of the sectors or people that shouldn't be using it are pregnant ladies, anyone who's breastfeeding, and ultimately anyone who's on medication. They also made a reference, which Bo's just talked about, with regards to the amount, or the maximum permissible amount each day, which is 70 milligrams.
I think it's going to be, I guess, quite maybe difficult for consumers to really understand how much they're really meant to be consuming, and what they need for it to be a benefit. I was chatting to Mark earlier today actually around the cumulative effects of CBD. Mark, could you just quickly share, I guess, the hypotheses and theories around what CBD might actually do for you from a health perspective?
Well, I have to be very careful here because I can't make any claims, but there is an awful lot of research that's been done historically, particularly by the NIH in the States, but most of that work is done on preclinical models, like on rats and mice and monkeys, God forbid. But that data is old. It's very old, and there's from a purely physical perspective, there is no correlation or guarantee that what you see happening in a rat or a mouse is going to happen in a human, and you can't assume the same sort of ratios of conversion or bioequivalency or therapeutic uptake. So you have to run those studies in intermediary species as well as in humans to be able to make the claim that you want to for sleep or for anxiety or for pain. But certainly the research areas that we're active in include immune modulation, which is sort of improving things like arthritis, for example. There's anti-inflammatory effect, which is also, there's a crossover for arthritis. There's a sort of a link between the two, but they are two distinctly different areas. You have drugs of addiction and abuse. You have anti-anxiolytic and anti-angiogenic. Now, those are sort of stress related, and they link to tiredness. They link to sleep. There's a lot of crossover between all of these different areas, and some of the cannabinoids are better used for some of those conditions than others. CBD specifically is frequently used for relieving pain and for anti-inflammatory effect and for anxiety and stress. But the evidence behind it is extremely limited. So there's a lot of R&D that's going on in different locations around the world. Some of it is observational and ad hoc. Some of it is randomized controlled studies, which will have published authors, and will go one day into the Cochrane review process, and everyone will sit there and go, fantastic, we 20 years. But the point is, the pathway that has been established for many, many years to prevent abuse and to protect the customer and the patient, and the difficulty that we've all got operating in this space at the moment is understanding where it is on that food to medicinal scale. When does it stop being a food, and when does it start being a medicine? And so, we're operating at the very low end of the scale, where drip feeding, microdosing, small amounts of food supplement can contribute to one's lifestyle and general diet and immunity levels, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we're all hoping. But very few of us have the data behind that yet. So, but it's accelerating. There's universities, there's companies, there's individuals all over the place who are involved in this kind of work now. And so it's only a matter of time before that comes into the public domain, before it gets published, and we can all have a lot more confidence in what we're doing. So we are in a bit of a sort of, an early part of the wedge. We're sort of on that curve. We're heading in the right direction. There's a lot more to do still.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds though that it is still the right time to innovate and develop in this space. You can't necessarily say a specific claim, but I guess that consumers are starting to perceive it as a good for you ingredient. Maybe David, you can kind of give us some guidance. I have a question here as well around, what can you say about why you've put CBD? But is it more that you need to just state what is in there rather than saying what it does, and let the consumers make up their mind as to whether it's an ingredient they want to take?
I think as much as possible, again, I sound like a broken record, but you need to be truthful with regards to the labelling and the ultimately the claims that you're making. Mark touched on it there. There's a real problem whether it's a cosmetic or a food. There's always a line where that suddenly becomes a medicine. So where you're making a number of claims, then suddenly you're in dangerous territory where suddenly your food product has become a medicine by virtue of the claims that you're making. Now, to be fair, the MHRA, who regulate medicines, have got extensive guidance. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you a list of claims that you can make. They say that it's on a case by case basis. But I think generally speaking, if you followed that advice and took advice from consultants or whatever, you'd be in a position to be able to make claims and ultimately be able to substantiate the claims that you're making. think there's another aspect as well, that there is a number of companies in this space who are making claims, say Mark mentioned it before, sort of THC 0%, etc., where they need to do the research, they need to do the due diligence to ensure that the claims that are making are correct. So again, in my time working with TTS Pharma, there's literally hundreds of companies out there that are making claims that if they did a minimal amount of research, they would realise very quickly that the claims that they're making are incorrect, false, in some stages reckless.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think later on we talk a bit about, I guess, branding and marketing, but it's, I guess, really important that, yeah, you are sticking to the truth and you are not misleading consumers in any way. I was going to wrap it up. I've got a couple of other questions around supply. Quite a lot of our attendees today are based in the UK, but we do have some from South Africa, Israel, quite a few places. And they have a question around, can you supply beyond Europe? And also, if you are launching a product within Europe, does it have to be from a EU-based supply?
If I can jump in, if we're dealing with cosmetics, it has to be sourced from the leaf of an European cultivar, and it must have come from a European supply chain for the finished product that's going to be sold in Europe. And there are a significant number of CBD products on the market throughout Europe that do not meet that regulation. They're working on the back of a CAS number, but it's been processed outside of the Europe. So that's a matter of time before those firms or supply chains are named and shamed. But technically, they would be so, for example, toothpaste in America or cosmetics in America, it's fairly standard process already to change some of the ingredients, because they might be grass, generally recognized as safe in America or Canada, but they would not be in Europe. So you already have to reformulate that product when you're bringing it into Europe. So that's one thing to be concerned about. If you're looking at foods, there's no specific requirement that it has to come from a European cultivar at the moment. However, the amount of scrutiny that a regulatory authority would give to a non-European body would be considerably higher, and there's a number of reasons for that, and that's largely due to the fact that typically European cultivars are not grown outside of Europe, and also and therefore they tend to be higher in controlled components. They also don't analyze or test to the same standard. They have a totally different testing procedure. So, for example, cannabidiol, which is one of the other primary cannabinoids, CBN, is frequently omitted from any laboratory testing undertaken in North America because it's not on the banned list over there, but it is in UK and it is in a number of other European countries. So you have to be very careful about all of the different steps, and you have to reveal, of course, your certificate of origin, your material safety data sheet. You have to have a complete verification chain of paperwork that stands behind all your products. And if you're expecting a regulator to turn around and review your product and expect them to give you approval for something, and that information is missing, or it conflicts with, it's not supported by valid data, for example, then you're going to have a much longer path through that review process. And I suspect that some of the changes that are going on at the moment with regards to the suspension of some of the European dossiers are possibly, I might even say, more linked to a protectionist agenda as opposed to making CBD a narcotic. I don't see CBD becoming a narcotic, but I do see where you get CBD from as being an issue. So there are those kinds of discussions which are still to play through. We are, as a company, able to supply outside of Europe. We're not restricted in that regards, but of course we do also have to respect the rules of where we're shipping to. So, for example, South Africa, we have an import license. We have we're about to launch our first products into South Africa ourselves with partners, And we've had to change all the labeling. We've had to change all the supporting paperwork to make sure that the 20 milligrams per day, which is the RDA down there, is very clear. And we can't use the same product as what we're using in UK or elsewhere in Europe.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. No. It sounds like you actually have a full understanding of the regulatory landscape. So definitely, if anyone who's joined the webinar has any further questions, we're very, very happy to put you in touch with Mark and his team. But I'm going to wrap up the panel session now. So thank you so much for joining us, Mark, Bo, and David. I'm now going to hand over to Susanna, because just putting CBD in your product, making sure it's legally compliant, isn't going to be enough for success. You're going to have to do a lot more to ensure that consumers understand the efficacy and kind of the reasons to believe. So Susanna? Oh, I think you're on mute, Susanna.
Correct, Amira, I'm on mute. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amira, and thank you everybody on the panel. It's absolutely fascinating, and I do bow to your superior knowledge in this space. Myself and Mia, who's also on the line, we're going to take you through really now some inspiration for your own NPD. So we've learned an awful lot about the regulations and the rules, but actually for the consumer, it's about the product. So we're going to take you through some inspiration of products currently on the market already in the CBD space, and then really give you our take on where we feel the opportunities are and how you can play that through from a product development point of view. So I'll hand you over to Mia shortly, but just before I do, just to say the products that we're going to be sharing as examples are ones which are already on the market. Hardly any, if not any of them, are probably not necessarily legally compliant, so they're not going to be around from the 31st of March next year necessarily, but they can provide us with inspiration for what consumers are currently being exposed to. So I'll now hand you over to Mia.
Hi everyone. So if we start by looking at cosmetics. Cosmetics have very much led the way in the CBD innovation space. They've provided some clear examples of the different positionings that CBD innovation can take in the different streams. So anything from day creams offering promises of brightness and energy during the day, to creams that you put on your face at night, which are going to repair and rejuvenate your skin. There's a lot of buzzwords going on in this sector, and it's very much allows CBD to fit into the health and beauty scene, which seems like an obvious place for it to situate itself. A couple of the recognizable brands that we can see here include, Holland & Barrett, Avon, Revolution, are just some of the many health or cosmetics brands that have jumped on the bandwagon, if you will, into CBD. From our research, we have found that there are two kind of key CBD innovation streams that appear to be emerging. The first situates CBD as the star of the show. It associates it with legalized cannabis. It's quite hippie, dirty, naughty, the legalized drug, as you will. And these can sometimes have negative associations, and we're actually going to suggest that for the moving forward that we stay away from these, because we have got consumers which are anti-drugs which might have these negative associations. You are safer to go with a more natural, hippie, positive associations, which would be much more effective and appealing to those consumers. We've also got the CBD as a supporting cast, and this is much more plant power, relaxation, wellness. It's going to appeal to those consumers who are health conscious. And so these are the kind of the two different routes and the associations which we believe the consumers are appearing to be having with CBD as it stands. Again, with the consumer segments, and this is a question that came up with the Q&A, so we've identified two key consumer segments. The first being the quick fix consumer. So this is a one-time user, they're on the go, they want to try it out, they've seen it as a fad, it's a trend, they want to see what's all the fuss about, they're probably going to try it once, and they're not going to really see the benefits as a result of this one go. They are usually going to consume CBD in the form of energy drinks, fizzy drinks, pill poppers, sweets, gummy bears. And so, like I said, they are not really going to see the benefits. In contrast, we've got this long-term lifestyle consumer who are going to invest time and energy into informing themselves and educating themselves about the benefits of CBD, and they're going to become regular ritualized users of CBD, and they really can start to see the benefits of those. And we can see that there'll be these are very different markets. And as such, we will see two different CBD types of products emerging, targeting these two different groups of people. So we're going to break these two sectors down separately. And we're first going to look at the quick fix consumer, which is our on-the-go, quick, one-time user. So this, the drink sector, which, as I mentioned, has been a classic way for these consumers to consume CBD, has become a very saturated market very quickly. It's a really easy way for producers to put CBD into an already existing product and allows an easy on-the-go drink, which targets the younger market, which can be consumed easily. Whilst this is quite a saturated space, and as Susanna said, not many of these products will actually be in compliance, we think there's some real potential here for an infiltration into the canned cocktail space. As we're on the go, retailers like M&S are now offering canned pina coladas and mojitos, and we think that by adding CBD into these canned cocktails, there's a real interesting space. So whilst this is a saturated market, there are some real exciting potential here. We're moving on to sweet things, and this is a really interesting space. So it very much fits in with the indulgent occasion. It's accessible, they're sweet treats, but with a boost, allowing consumers to enjoy a sweet treat and satisfy their sweet tooth without less of the guilt. I just want to pick out a couple of the products because there are quite a few here. One being the Floyd's and Leadville Cbd Recovery Bar on the left there. So this is a post-gym recovery bar boosted with CBD, promising to help the consumer recover from their gym session. So your classic target market for this is going to be your health focus, gym goer, protein lover, and that's quite an interesting space for this brand to have gone into. And if we just take that and compare it to the bottom right Melt ice cream, which is much more indulgent, it's a very luxurious high-end brand. They would be in competition with brands such as Magnum, for example. It's very interesting to see how these two sweet brands have actually taken a very different vantage point, which just really shows how the broad spectrum of what CBD, how it can be applied. So the savory space, this is actually quite a limited space and not that saturated as it stands. However, we can expect this to become a much more popular area as consumers look to reduce their sugar and fat intake, and still are encouraged to snack, to kind of have those 6 meals a day rather than the 3. They want to snack healthy, snack wise, with high protein, healthy fats. Snack, we can see that the savory CBD market will definitely be increasing and definitely a space to watch. Hummus as well, nut butters, these are all kind of buzzwords which are getting quite popular within the food market. If we move across to our long-term lifestyle consumers and have a look at these. So these are our regular users. They're going to become a part of their ritual, their everyday use. This is in contrast to our quick fix users. So supplements, these are the kinds of products, the kinds of ways that these long-term users are going to be taking CBD in. Supplements are easily understood. They're in a controlled dosage. They're an easy way for consumers to incorporate a CBD intake into their everyday lives. They're taking their vitamin C, their iron tablets, and then they can take their CBD tablets as well. It's an easy way for consumers to get that into their life. There is something to be cautious about, however, in the positioning. As Amira said originally, we've got to make sure that we're not replacing other foods in a way that stops consumer from getting their nutritional intake. They can't put consumers at a nutritional disadvantage, so it must be situated as an addition rather than a substitution. And that's a really clear point that's really important if you were looking to go into this space. If we look at soft drinks, so here is a space where a number of trusted brands, so we've got brands like Good Hemp, Hello CBD and Vita Coco, so recognizable brands who have boosted their already existing products with CBD. And this is a really easy way for brands to get CBD into their portfolio. If we take Good Hemp, for example, which is the bottom right, it's the barista seed milk. This is a plant-based milk. So for consumers that are already buying plant-based milk on a regular basis, it's something that they're adding to their trolley in their weekly shop. This allows them the choice to continue shopping as they've always been shopping with the same products, but with a boost of CBD. And this is quite interesting because if we compare this portfolio here of soft drinks and compare it to the drinks which we saw for the Quick Fist, they're very, very different. These are much more kind of high end. They are facing a completely different consumer market to the fizzy, probably quite high sugar, canned on the go drinks, which we're looking at for the Quick Fix. So quite an interesting comparison there. And the products for each will be very, very different. Hot beverages. So this is another example of CBD brands which are slotting into people's lives. For those of us that are tea lovers, we drink tea all the time. So why not just have a CBD infused tea or of your favorite flavor as well? So again, this is a prime example of how CBD is slopping into already existing products which consumers are already buying. We think there's some fantastic opportunities here, and we had some great brainstorms around this, one of which was the idea we could have tea infused kombucha. Using a CBD tea as the base for your kombucha could be a really exciting example of a way that we could use tea and CBD into a new product. So we're back to sweet things, but for our long-term users. So this is slightly different in that this is indulgence without the guilt. So this is targeting consumers who have a sweet tooth. They need to satisfy that sweet tooth, but don't want the guilt of eating the sugar and the calories. So for these products are perfect for those who are trying to do that. This is very much a way of CBD entering the health space. And whilst many of these products couldn't actually be considered as healthy, they probably have still quite a high calorie level as well as sugar level. It's not necessarily healthier, but being within the health space and consumers having that positive association will help sell these products. There's a real potential here for these healthier snacks to be put into food service, with cafes and delis increasingly offering brownies infused with CBD on their counters to go along with their coffees and whatever they are selling. So we've shared and looked at a number of examples and areas to innovate, and there are clearly some really exciting ways that we can do this. I think the key point that is important to take away is to have a clear focus. So to ensure that your brand has a clear focus in terms of the sector that it's going to look at and the target audience that it's going to target. So whether it's going to be your quick fix consumers or your long-term consumers, the products that you create as a result will be very different. So in order to avoid confusion, stay focused with your product. Thank you. I'll hand you back to Susanna.
Thank you so much, Mia, for that fascinating inspiration of products around the world and also some of your ideas. So the last thing I think really is for us at Cubo to give you our perspective on where we feel the opportunities are, but also potentially some of the watch outs as well. Opportunity spaces. I mean, I think as we've already shared, there's so much exciting stuff going on. I think the areas that I think we would encourage our clients to focus on from an MPD perspective would be to play with things like exciting flavors and play with textures as well. Make sure that holistic product delivery is got to be more than just, this is a product with CBD in it. You know, there's got to be something in there that really works from an end to end of the journey when a consumer has your product. And I think that ties nicely in with this area of holistic positionings. So going just beyond the fact that it's CBD, you're going to be competing in categories where consumers are choosing between products that do and don't have CBD. It's going to be really, really important that you communicate a holistic benefit to them, be that an emotional benefit or a functional benefit. We also think there's some real watch outs, and we've talked about this a couple of times, but there's definitely the confusion from the consumer about the difference between hemp and marijuana and the difference between the plants and where it comes from. And so we would just advise a word of caution, I think, in using hemp imagery when communicating your product. You know, you want your consumer this to be something that they enjoy. Yes, perhaps it is seen as maybe a little bit naughty and a little bit edgy, but equally you want to make sure that what they're taking from it is that they're getting a really clear benefit from the consumption. And I think that ties nicely, again, with some of the aspects that we talked about in the panel discussion, but these artificial medical positionings, which some of the products out there do already have, that can get you into slightly dangerous territory when it comes to a claims point of view, and also doesn't necessarily communicate your overarching emotional or holistic benefit to the consumer. And then I think the last two are just a nod to the fact that consumers' lives are already incredibly busy. Creating completely new consumption occasions in somebody's routine is almost impossible. So these products are going to have to displace something that consumer already has. Therefore, you're going to be competing in incredibly busy markets. So it's going to be really, really important that your product fits to that target occasion that Mia mentioned. That's so, so important, so that you don't cause confusion for the consumer or end up in a bit of a middle ground where your product doesn't quite fit to one time or another. And I think the last thing we'd like to really think about from an NPD perspective is actually to go all the way down to how you get it into market. And thinking about the route, you don't just need to go down traditional retail, and actually potentially traditional retail isn't the right way for a CBD product. And actually one of your transformational quick fix products for that quick consumer who's looking for something a bit fun, on trade and out of home is going to be absolutely ideal and absolutely the right kind of environment for that. But your long-term lifestyle consumer, have you thought about a subscription service, for example? Everybody loves to receive a box of brownies in the post for my indulgent evening dessert. And what better if it had a good dose of CBD in it to help me relax and sleep? There's some fantastic examples out there of brands already moving into this space. Bill's, for example, the restaurant chain, has a CBD menu of CBD cocktails. And Biomal, which is a shot product, a probiotic shot product, doesn't contain CBD, but they've moved into the subscription place. So again, really thinking about that target consumer and that target occasion and how you can access them as easily as possible. Our point of view at Cubo is we feel there's three really key areas of opportunity. The adult soft drink, what we've called the adult dessert, but I think that would also include things like confectionery, and then what we've called the recovery occasion. So that's not just after sports recovery, but also that afternoon recovery where I need to recover from my morning and have enough energy to get on with my evening. We really feel that those are three occasions which are ripe for a CBD product. And with that in mind, we've kind of come up with what we would call a Cubo sensory playbook for how you might execute this. So thinking about that playbook of playful excitement, that would really fit with that adult soft drink occasion. And again, both of your target consumers are going to be experiencing this occasion. Here, you want to be playing with packaging that's bright and colourful, that's Instagrammable, made of a premium substrate like glass to really kind of communicate that adult messaging. From a sensorial perspective, you want that drink, if it was a drink, you would like it to probably be light in carbonation. That really helps kind of communicate that playful aspect, but it's not overwhelming on the sensory palate. What you can do here is play with some really complex flavour combinations. Consumers do want a challenge here, particularly if this is a non-alcoholic drink, for example, that might be replacing an alcohol in a consumer's consideration set. And you can really play with sour or stronger flavours and have a more lingering aftertaste, really give them something that's going to really play to all the excitement of that enjoyable moment. And from a flavour perspective, so many options, from floral and botanicals through fruits like pomegranate and elderberry, and really interesting ingredients like chili or rooibos or Earl Grey tea. I could really see the kombucha idea that Mia had playing really nicely in this space. The next would be our playbook of calm indulgence. So I think this really fits with that adult indulgent. And I have to say, I think probably fits more to that lifestyle consumer. So again, back to my subscription box of brownies that I love to receive in the post. Here you want packaging that is really light and muted. Use a matte substrate so the way it feels in consumers' hands is calming. And think about how your packaging is opened. I know that might seem like a really small thing, but a slow open and reveal really allows the consumer to savor that moment and really create space for them in their day. From a sensorial perspective, if this was a drink, you would want light carbonation, but also really small bubbles. So it's just a really gentle tingling on the tongue. If it was a food, like a brownie, for example, or a biscuit, something which is smooth and mouth coating, provides a longer chew, but it's not heavy. And sweet products do, or sweeter products do play well in this space. And couple that with a really light aroma. Again, nothing that's really strong and powerful, because that's not going to give that calming emotional connection. From a flavour perspective, again, lots to play with here: herbals, botanicals, fruits, and of course, chocolate. And then lastly, the playbook of fueled focus. So this really fits with that recovery occasion, and probably fits more with that quick fix consumer. And this is really quite an opposite. So your packaging is darker colours, more muted, a thicker and crisper substrate, and very ergonomic in the hand. So it's really designed for on the go. Sensorially, with your drinks, they need to be quite high in carbonation with big bubbles so you can really feel it in the mouth. And perhaps look at slightly more acidic or slightly bitter flavours that give a stronger overall flavor delivery, again, to really drive home that kind of fueled and focused message. And you get to play with some more challenging flavours there, spices like ginger and cayenne pepper, or citrus fruits or pineapple, or ginseng or eucalyptus from a botanical perspective. So that really was a flying whistle-stop tour of some of the opportunities in the NPD space, and we'd of course be delighted to talk more about how we could help you develop a product for a target consumer and occasion. I wanted to say that obviously by partnering with Cubo and with our experts, you've got the full package here: the industry specialists in TTS Pharma, our insight and consumer specialists like myself and Amira, and our culinary and commercial specialists like Mia and the rest of the team at Cubo, Mike and Emily and Alex, who haven't joined us today. And we can deliver that for you using our 12-week end-to-end innovation tool called iDare. iDare is designed to get you from just your idea all the way through to having you a retailer-ready video. So you've got a product that can go in for stability testing and go in and get ready to be compliant, as the guys from TTS Pharma were telling us earlier. And we can deliver that in 12 weeks, and from anything from as little as 50K, depending on your category. So to summarize, we can help you at all the steps, whether you've already got a product and you just want to switch to a UK compliant supply chain, we're here to help you, all the way through to labelling and promotion and regulatory advice, or even working to provide contract manufacturing guidance should you need it, and everything in between. So to close, all I would say is act now, don't wait and miss that first mover advantage. Over to Amira and see whether we've got any time left for the last couple of questions.
Yes, we're just at time, but we're just wrapping up, I think. I think some of the questions we already answered as throughout your talk. I have one question here around kind of playing within the alcohol space. So I guess, is there any regulatory issues with putting alcohol with CBD? I guess maybe to David or to Mark.
Well, I'll give it a first crack and then maybe David can follow up. There are, in order to get CBD into an alcohol or any liquid, you need to use a technology to do that. So whether it's a nanotechnology or emulsification or liposomal technology, that automatically makes it a novel food. So just by looking at the range of products you've got, none of them, I suspect, will have had novel food approval. In fact, we know none of them have, because no one's been approved yet. There are also 169 patents in the space. So it's very important to understand who the licensors of those patents are. Some of them are quite well-known household names, and having access to that IP, that intellectual property, is essential for a sustainable business plan. So my recommendation is don't ignore what you can't see. There's an awful lot of regulations behind all of this, but there are also some commercial legal rules which may prevent products being launched. And therefore it's very important to make sure you've got all those bases covered. But the alcohol space is certainly somewhere that is very exciting and full of prospects. And we're aware of people looking at the mixers market, because obviously that's 3/4 of your drink when it's a spirit. If you're looking at beer, there are people who are looking to take the alcohol out and replace it with a cannabinoid, which is one interesting option. And the other one, of course, is mixing the two together. So you've got an alcohol mix. It'll all depend on who those people are, what they're looking for to develop, whether it's a soft drink or an alcoholic drink, I think, or a blend of the two if you're looking to mix them. There's an awful lot of opportunity that has not yet been captured.
Brilliant. Yeah, definitely. That's the kind of the sense I'm getting, that this is a super exciting area. There are lots of ideas we could go forward with. It might be a bit of a challenge, but definitely, we recommend to our clients, don't lose that, don't lose being first to market, push through and be brave. I think if there's any other questions, if anybody wants to just drop me an email, I'm amira@cbdinnovation.com, and I will make sure you speak to the right people. But thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to David, Mark and Bo. Really, really appreciate you having you on board. Thank you everybody, and have a great afternoon.